Republican side of this primary season mostly wrapped up, barring some shenanigans at the convention. Let's turn to the Democratic side and what effect Trump being the presumptive nominee might have on the Democratic side. So you might think, well, I mean, how closely connected can they be? They're totally separate sides. They're not running against each other yet. But I've been doing my research and I've been doing my thinking, and I think there are a few ways that Cruz leaving and Kasich leaving could actually impact Bernie versus Hillary in the remaining contests. So one is that while Trump has not been shy about attacking Hillary Clinton up until now, he has also had to spend a lot of his time attacking Ted Cruz, especially, sometimes Ted Cruz's wife, John Kasich.
You mean Lion Ted?
Lion Ted, yeah. Exactly. Sorry, his name has been changed since then. Mm-hmm. So attacking Lion Ted. But now he doesn't need to attack Lion Ted. He's going to attack the one person he thinks he's going to be running against, which is Hillary Clinton.
Crooked Hillary.
Crooked Hillary. Sorry, her name also changed. I forgot. So look, I'm not saying that his attacks are going to be substantive and they're going to convince people to change who they support. And in fact, they might even be, they might work against him because it might lead other Democrats to think, oh, well, look at his unfair, likely, very sexist attacks. I know everybody says that about every attack against Hillary Clinton, but with Donald Trump, it's true. That might impact the balance a bit, that Donald Trump's attention will be all on Hillary. Bernie Sanders might then not have to do as much attacking. I don't know. And
well, I agree. It does change a little bit of but here's what's interesting. This is how it helps Bernie Sanders, but Donald Trump being alone. Is that in these open primaries, people, Republicans and independents, who would have voted against Donald Trump can now vote against Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, whether they actually like Ted Cruz or not.
Yeah, they're going to want it because part of what they're doing is voting against Hillary Clinton, a lot of them anyway. So that opens up a whole new, I mean, it's not, I don't think it's difference making, but if you look at a small swath of people who do that to disrupt what's going on, that can only help Senator Sanders.
I think this can help Bernie Sanders going forward. What if she doesn't win another primary going forward? I mean,
it's also possible.
It's possible.
I mean, talk about a damaged. That's really
a damaged candidate. You're saying.
And what do you say about that? I mean, so you know, people want to vote against the establishment. They're all going to now. They have only one person. I mean, I guess they can vote for Trump, but that's.
I just said this.
Yeah.
So he thinks that a lot of the people who would have gone in to cast a vote against Trump, and we know there's a lot of Democrats, a lot of liberals, and a lot of independents who hate him and want to do that, now they will be freed up to vote for Bernie. Now, there aren't a lot of open primaries left, but California is mixed, and even a couple of percentage points in a state as large and as consequential as California, that could matter a lot.
Well,
it could,
if what the big fear is that Donald Trump might become president, and that's everybody's big fear. What I say is Bernie Sanders just won in Indiana. He might win all the way through to the convention. And I say if you're really afraid of a Donald Trump presidency, vote for Bernie Sanders because he's the one who he doesn't have half the vulnerabilities that Hillary Clinton. We've showed it. It's manifest that she is not only a flawed candidate, she's a horrible candidate, and she's a bad politician. She's not a good politician. Yes, she knows how to be friendly with Republicans. That doesn't mean she's a good politician. That just means that she knows how to make friends with her enemies. Which, by the way, they still hate her. And they impeached her husband after he deregulated Wall Street for him. That's how much they like the Clintons. So if you really want to get rid of Donald Trump, and if you're really afraid of Donald Trump, the vote is for Bernie Sanders. That's clear. And he still does have a chance to win. He won last night. He might win all the way to the convention. Again, don't forget that she is my favorite presidential candidate who's potentially under indictment.
She still has that honor.
Still has that going. So I think it's important, really, I'm still going to phone bank for Bernie. I'm going to give my vote to Bernie. I think it's important to vote for Bernie and stay positive.
Vote for him?
Okay, thank you.
And look, Bernie has said he's going to the convention. His campaign has said there will be a contested convention. Now, that's not 100% up to them at the end of the day, but that's what he's saying. And in a couple of months, almost, of hardcore attacks against Hillary Clinton from Trump, combined with the likelihood that at least some of the remaining contests will go to Bernie, could put it in a situation where she needs the superdelegates to put her over the top.
Yes.
But if she's doing much worse against him, look, I think that the Democratic Party is willing to take that chance.
I agree.
Unfortunately.
But it's
not impossible that they could look at the numbers and look at the polls, even though, as Michael says, the polls are not destiny at this point, And they could then figure out, well, maybe not. And especially, that's another month or two of, we just found out that some of the aides of Hillary Clinton are going to be brought in to testify on the email case. They haven't decided yet on Hillary Clinton, but it's not impossible that in the next 2 months that they could. That's also possible. So one other thing, too, is that I think could help Bernie.
Okay.
So you think voting in California is going to matter?
I think that the vote will matter in California, yes. It's
I
be
might
exciting.
not vote this time.
Why not?
Well, because I don't think that I'm supposed to. I think that I've been doing this.
Get out of here. You're an American first, a journalist second.
All right.
You should
I'm
still
an
have
American
opinions.
first. Yeah,
and
I want to
you were a
vote.
young-
I've never not voted
you were a
ever
Young
in
Turk
any
first.
election. I was a Young Turk first. I've never not voted in any election since I turned 18.
Yeah.
I mean, every little. I
Me
love
too, I
voting.
voted. Me
I'm
too.
sure you have. Voting's great.
Aren't you upset? Well, why do you think there isn't more of an upsetness, or there isn't more outcry from the Democrats in general? I'm not talking about the super lefties. I'm talking about in general. Why aren't they upset that they haven't been presented with a better candidate? Why isn't there a little bit of a revolt of regular Democrats saying, really? This is what we get, the candidate with the highest negatives in history?
think that-
This is what we're left with? Someone who's an emblem for what's wrong with politics today? We can't get anything better than
I
this?
don't know. I think they're, Jimmy, I think the Democrats, Democrats I've spoken to, Democrats I know, think they have two great choices. They have that people who like Hillary Clinton, really like her. People who are more progressive and like this revolution idea, love Bernie Sanders. It's kind of, a good choice for Democrats. It doesn't. It's the problem is when there's a nominee who the other ones don't like. I mean, I think more Hillary people are okay with Bernie than Bernie people are with Hillary at this point. And that's where it becomes. But in terms of the choice among Democrats, I think there are a lot of Democrats that are really excited to vote for Bernie Sanders, obviously. And I think there are Democrats who voted for Hillary Clinton in big numbers last time that want to do it this time, too. So I think that it's going to be, the problem is when there's a nominee, and that's where the choice becomes difficult.
I think what was happening, I forget, a gentleman emailed me and sent me a link to a blog, and I forget whose it was, but he makes the case that...
It was a gentleman, though.
Yes, it was a gentleman.
And a scholar.
That tied in with the OJ trial, with what was on the People versus OJ, which I was watching. And so what happened in that trial was that there was jury nullification, right? They're like, hey, OJ might be guilty, whatever. We're blocking all that information out because it was presented by this corrupt system, and which is manifest in the racist Mark Furman. So we're going to do the jury nullification against the whole system. So this guy made the case that that's what the Hillary voters are doing because they see the glass ceiling as a real thing, and that they want to break that. They want to break through that, and so they're going to block out all the other information. And that's when you hear, hey, she's also a great candidate, even though to people like me, she's the worst candidate we've ever been presented with as a grown-up, and that she's the emblem of actually what's wrong with politics.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think some Democrats aren't driven by our core concerns about the problem with politics. And they look at her and they look at her compared to, like, I don't know, kind of to Obama, who also turned out to not be as liberal as we thought on a lot of issues. They look at compared to Kerry, compared to Bill Clinton. I mean, is she much more conservative than Bill Clinton? I don't know.
No,
I mean, look, he had some incredibly conservative policies.
Yes.
So when you look at her and you think about the fundamental problems we have with our politics, you get really scared. When you look at her and you compare her to the other people that we've had as candidates, it's like, I guess, I don't know.
Okay.
There's one other thing, though, really fast, that I think could help Bernie. And it's that the media now has been suckling on the attention that they've gotten, the nonstop coverage of these campaigns. A lot of that is Donald Trump-centric. He is now going to be talking about the Democrats, which means that the coverage, even the Trump coverage, is going to be about the Democrats. There's no more fully Republican news to cover just yet. That means if they want to fill hours of news with primary coverage, which they do, it is going to be about the Democrats. They didn't want that to be competitive a few weeks ago, but now they're going to need it to fill time and to bring in viewers. And I believe that whenever the Democrats, when Bernie and Hillary are being discussed, that's a good thing for Bernie because more people already know Hillary Clinton.
Yes.
So if suddenly now they're covering the Democratic town halls, if they're actually covering Bernie rallies, if they're getting his message across simply to fill the time, that could be a very good thing for Bernie Sanders going forward with the remaining
Well, as we
races.
saw last night, Bernie Sanders won Indiana. So there he goes. He's winning again. All he's doing is winning. And they showed the empty podium for Hillary Clinton and the empty podium for Donald Trump. All the way through his speech. Didn't even go, hey, by the way, didn't even put him in the corner like, hey, there's actually a speech going by the guy who won tonight.
There were two podiums on the screen at the same time.
Two empty podiums.
Doesn't that make them podia?
I think it does. Padilla. It's John Padilla.
John Padilla.
Yeah.
Well, here's one thing I will say, is speaking from other people in the press corps, Bernie's got to shake that speech up a little bit too.
Yeah, look, even us,
I'm
we've
just
said
saying,
it
kiddingly,
is roughly the same speech.
It's roughly the same speech. It's like hearing the same thing every time. It's, but no, I'm not defending
The millionaires and billionaires.
$27.
Every once in a while, he'll shake it up with like a bird or something.
Right,
That's always
true,
cool.
yeah.
Get a cat. But yeah, a lot of people in California haven't heard that speech
No, that's
yet.
true,
they're
and that's
about to get an
what we said
opportunity.
every speech, every time, every new state. It's like there's a new speech, there's a new the new audience.
Yeah.
27 also Bernie's Social Security number, and not a lot of people know that.